Well, hello everybody. It is Mr. Sanders Twin, and we are back for another read aloud of Just Mercy. So, to drink today, I got a bubbly mojito breeze to be specific, minty fresh. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 5 Homeland. Walter's wife, Minnie Bell McMillian, and his daughter Jackie were waiting patiently when I pulled up to the McMillians' dilapidated house in Repton, which was off the main road leading into Monroeville. It had been a long day. I was no longer sure what time it was. I'd spent several intense hours on death row earlier in the day with Walter going over his trial transcript. Time was critical. I should have returned to Montgomery to work on appeal pleadings, but Walter's family wanted to meet, and since they were less than an hour away from the prison, I had promised to come to Monroeville. I was surprised at the profound disrepair. This was a poor family's home. The front porch was propped on three cinder blocks. The wood flooring showed signs of rot. Blue window frames were in desperate need of paint. The yard was littered with abandoned car parts, tires, and broken pieces of furniture. Minnie walked out the front door and apologized for the appearance of the yard as I carefully stepped onto the porch. She kindly invited me inside. Let me fix you something to eat. You've been at the prison all day, she said. Minnie looked tired, but otherwise appeared as patient and strong as I had imagined, based on Walter's descriptions and my own guesses from our phone conversations. Because the state had made Walter's affair with Karen Kelly part of its case in court, the trial had been especially difficult for Minnie, but she looked like she was still standing strong. Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate it, but it's fine. Walter and I ate some things on the visitation yard. They don't have nothing on that prison yard but chips and sodas. Let me cook you something good. That's very kind. I appreciate it, but I'm really okay. I know you've been working all day, too. Well, yes, I'm on 12-hour shifts at the plant. Them people don't want to hear nothing about your business, your sickness, your nerves, and definitely nothing about your family problems. She didn't sound angry or bitter, just sad. She walked over to me, gently looped her arm with mine, and slowly led me into the house. We sat down on a sofa in the crowded living room. Chairs that didn't match were piled with papers and clothes. Her grandchildren's toys were scattered on the floor. Work people tell you to be there, and so you got to go. I'm trying to get her through school, and it ain't easy. She nodded to her daughter Jackie, who looked back at her mother sympathetically. Jackie walked across the room and sat near us. Walter and Minnie had mentioned their children, Jackie, Johnny, and Boot, to me several times. Jackie's name was always followed by she's in college. I'd begun to think of her as Jackie, she's in college, McMillian. All of the kids were in their 20s, but still very close and protective of their mother. I told them about my visit with Walter and talked about the next steps in the case. They updated me on all the rumors in town currently circulating about the case. I believe that it was old man Miles Jackson who done it, Minnie said emphatically. I think it's the new owner, Rick Blair, Jackie said. Everybody knows they found a white man's skin under that girl's fingernails where she had fought whoever killed her. As we talked, it became clear how traumatizing the last 18 months since Walter's arrest had been. The trial was the worst, Minnie said. They just ignored what we told them about Johnny D being home. Nobody has explained to me why they did that. Why did they do that? She looked at me as if she honestly hoped I could provide an answer. This trial was constructed with lies, I said. I was cautious about expressing such strong opinions to Walter's family because I hadn't investigated the case enough yet. But reading the record of his trial had outraged me, not just about the injustice done to Walter, but also about the way it had burdened the entire community. Everyone in the poor black community who talked to me about the case had expressed hopelessness. One lie after the other, I continued. People were fed so many lies that by the time y'all start telling the truth, it was just easier to believe you were the ones who were lying. It frustrates me to even read it in the trial record, so I can only imagine how you all feel. Her phone rang and Jackie jumped up to answer it. She came back a few minutes later. Eddie said that people are getting restless. They want to know when he's going to be there. Minnie stood up and straightened her dress. Well, we should probably get going. They've been waiting most of the day for you. When I looked confused, Minnie smiled. Oh, I told the rest of the family we would bring you down there, since it's so hard to find where they live if you've never been there before. His sisters, nephews, nieces, and other folks want to meet you. All right, let's go ahead and answer that first question. How does Minnie, Walter's wife, react to the trial? You'll find clues for this question in this paragraph right here. As we talked, it became clear how traumatizing the last 18 months since Walter's arrest had been, and also this paragraph. The trial was the worst, Minnie said. They just ignored what we told them about Johnny D being home. If you need a sentence starter, you can use she reacts to the trial by blank. All right, let's go ahead and continue. I followed their directions down a long, winding dirt road full of impossible turns through a heavily wooded area. We came to a short, narrow bridge with room for only one car to pass. It looked shaky and unstable, so I slowed the car to a stop. It's okay. It hasn't rained that much, and that's the only time when it's really a problem, Minnie said. What kind of problem? I didn't want to sound scared, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and in the pitch black night, I couldn't tell whether it was a swamp, a creek, or a small river under the bridge. It will be all right. People drive through here every day, Jackie chimed in. It would have been too embarrassing to turn around, so I drove slowly across the bridge and was relieved when we made it to the other side. The forest began to give way to trailers, a few small homes, and finally an entire community hidden away in the woods. We pulled up a hill until we reached a trailer that was glowing in the darkness, lit by a fire burning in a barrel out front. Small children were playing outside. They dashed into the trailer when they saw our car pull up. As we got out of the car, a tall man greeted us. He hugged Minnie and Jackie before shaking my hand. They've been waiting for you, he told me. I know you probably got a lot of work to do, but we appreciate you coming to meet with us. I'm Giles, Walter's nephew. Giles led us inside. The small home was packed with more than 30 people, whose chattering fell silent when I entered. One by one, they started to smile at me. Then, to my amazement, the room broke into loud applause. I was stunned by the gesture. No one had ever applauded me just for showing up. There were older women, younger women, men Walter's age, and several men much older. Their faces were creased with worry. When the applause had died down, I began to speak. Thank you. That's very kind, I started. I'm so glad to meet you all. Mr. McMillian told me he had a large family, but I didn't expect so many of you to be here. I saw him today, and he wants me to pass along his thanks and his gratitude to all of you for sticking by him. I hope you know how much your support means. He has to wake up on death row every morning, and that's not easy, but he knows he's not alone. He talks about you all the time. Sit down, Mr. Stevenson, someone shouted. I took a seat on an empty couch that seemed to have been reserved for me, and Minnie sat down beside me. We don't have any money. We gave it all to the first lawyer, called out one of the men. I understand that, and I won't take a penny. I work for a nonprofit law office, and we provide legal assistance at no cost to the people we represent, I replied. Well, how do you pay the bills? Asked one woman. People laughed at the question. We get donations from foundations and people who support our work. An older woman spoke up. It was Armelia Hand, Walter McMillian's older sister. We don't have much, Mr. Stevenson, but You have someone we love in your care. Anything we have, you have. These people have broken our hearts, she said. The family shared questions and comments about Walter, the town, race, the police, the trial, and the way the whole family was now being treated by people in the community. There seemed to be therapeutic relief in voicing their concerns to me. I began to feel encouraged that some of the information I provided maybe eased their anxiety. We started to joke some, and before I knew it, I felt embraced in a way that energized me. An older woman had given me a tall glass of sweet iced tea, and no matter how much or how little I drank, she minded my glass religiously the entire evening. As our conversation continued, Armelia Hand again spoke up. We were standing next to him that whole morning. We know where he was. We know what he was doing. Her voice grew louder and more distraught. The crowd in the small trailer hummed in agreement. It was the kind of wordless testimony of struggle and anguish I heard all the time growing up in a small rural black church. Just about everybody in here was standing next to him, talking to him, laughing with him, eating with him. Then the police come along months later, say he killed somebody miles away at the same time we were standing next to him. Then they take him away when you know it's a lie. She was now struggling to speak. Her hands were trembling, and the emotion in her voice was making it hard for her to get her words out. We were with him all day. What are we supposed to do, Mr. Stevenson? Tell us, what are we supposed to do with that? Her face twisted in pain. I feel like I've been convicted too. The small crowd responded to each statement with shouts of, yes, and that's right. I feel like they done put me on death row too. What do we tell these children about how to stay out of harm's way when you can be at your own house, minding your own business, surrounded by your entire family, and they still put some murder on you that you ain't do and send you to death row? I sat on the crowded sofa in my suit, staring into the face of a lot of pain. I hadn't expected to have such an intense meeting when I arrived. Folks were desperate for answers and trying to reconcile themselves to a situation that made no sense. I was struggling to think of something appropriate to say when a younger woman, who was Walter's niece, spoke up. Johnny D could have never done this no kind of way, whether we was with him or not, she said, using the nickname Walter's family and friends had given him. He's just not like that. By then, it was close to midnight, and it would take me at least 2 hours to get to Montgomery. I said my farewells and exchanged hugs with practically everyone in the room before stepping out into the dark night. December is rarely bitter cold in South Alabama during the day, but at night the temperatures can drop, a dramatic reminder that it's winter, even in the South. Without an overcoat, I cranked up the heat for the long drive home after dropping Minnie and Jackie back at their house. The meeting with the family had been inspiring. There were clearly a lot of people who cared deeply about Walter and consequently cared about how I could help. But it was also clear that people had been traumatized by what had happened. They needed a place to share their hurt and confusion. Walter's family and most poor black people in his community were similarly burdened by Walter's conviction. The community seemed desperate for some hope of justice. The realization left me anxious but determined. All right, let's go ahead and answer that next question. Why are Walter's friends and family so outraged by the verdict? You might want to pay attention to this paragraph right here. Just about everybody in here was standing next to him, talking to him, laughing with him, eating with him. Then the police come along months later and say he killed somebody miles away at the same time. If you'd like a sentence starter, you can use they are so outraged because blank. Okay, let's continue. I'd gotten used to taking calls from lots of people concerning Walter's case. Most were poor and black, and they offered encouragement and support. And occasionally, a white person for whom Walter had worked would call to offer support, like Sam Crook. My people were heroes of the Confederacy, Crook said. I've inherited their land, their title, and their pride. I love this country, but I know what happened to Walter McMillian ain't right. Well, I appreciate your call. Well, I've decided I ain't gonna let them string him up. I'll get some boys and we'll go cut him down before we let them take him. I'm just not going to stand for them putting a good man down for something I know he didn't do. Sam Crook spoke in grand proclamations. I hesitated over how to respond. Well, thank you, was all I could manage. When I later asked Walter about Sam Crook, he just smiled. I've done a lot of work for him. He's been good to me. He's a very interesting guy. I saw Walter just about every other week for those first few months, and I learned some of his habits. Interesting was Walter's word for odd, and having worked for hundreds of people throughout the county over the years, he'd encountered no shortage of interesting people. The more unusual or bizarre the person was, the more interesting they were, according to Walter. Very interesting and real interesting. And finally, now he's real interesting, were the markers for strange and stranger characters. Walter seemed reluctant to say anything bad about anyone. He'd just chuckle if he thought someone was odd. Walter grew much more comfortable during our visits, and sometimes he would veer into topics that had nothing to do with the case. The guards, other prisoners, people back home we thought would visit but hadn't. In these conversations, Walter showed remarkable empathy. He spent a lot of time imagining what other people were thinking and feeling. He guessed what frustrations guards must be experiencing to excuse the rude things they said to him. He gave voice to how hard it must be to visit someone on death row. We also talked about the food he liked, jobs he'd worked when he was younger. We talked about race and power, the things we saw that were funny, and the things we saw that were sad. It made him feel better to have a normal conversation with someone who wasn't on the row or a guard, and I always spent extra time with him to talk about things unrelated to the case. Not just for him, but for myself as well. I found something refreshing in the moments I spent with clients when we didn't relate to one another as attorney and client, but as friends. My work had quickly become my life, and Walter's case was becoming the most complicated and time consuming I'd ever worked on. Man, all these guys talk about how you're working on their case. You must not ever get any peace, he told me once. Well, everybody needs help, so we're trying. He gave me an odd look that I hadn't seen before. I think he wasn't sure whether he could give me advice. He hadn't done that yet. Finally, he looked at me earnestly and said, well, you can't help everybody. You'll kill yourself if you try to do that. He continued looking at me with concern. I smiled. I know. I mean, you gotta help me. You shouldn't hold nothing back on my case, he said with a smile. I expect you to fight all comers and to get me out of here. Take 'em all down if necessary. Stand up to giants, slay wild beasts, wrestle alligators, I joked. The more time I spent with Walter, the more I cared for this kind, decent man with a generous nature. He freely acknowledged that he'd made poor decisions, particularly where women were concerned. But all the friends, family, and associates who knew him agreed. Walter generally tried to do the right thing. In all death penalty cases, spending time with clients is important. Developing the trust of clients is not only necessary to manage the complexities of the litigation and deal with the stress of a potential execution, it's also key to effective advocacy. The client's life often depends on his lawyer's ability to create a narrative that puts in context and explains his poor decisions or violent behavior. Uncovering things about someone's background that no one has previously discovered, things that might be hard to discuss but are critically important, requires trust. Getting someone to acknowledge he has been the victim of child sexual abuse, neglect, or abandonment won't happen without the kind of comfort that takes hours and multiple visits to develop. Talking about sports, TV, popular culture, or anything else the client wants to discuss is absolutely appropriate to building a relationship that makes effective work possible. But it also creates genuine connections with clients. And that's certainly what happened with Walter. All right, let's go ahead and answer the third question. Why does Brian think it's important for lawyers to get to know their clients? He spends an entire long paragraph discussing this, but make sure you're paying particular attention to this sentence right here. A client's life often depends on his lawyer's ability to create a narrative that puts in context and explains his poor decisions or violent behavior. If you need a sentence starter, you can use he thinks it's important because blank. All right, let's go ahead and finish up the chapter and answer the last question. Shortly after my first trip to see Walter's family, I received a call from a young man named Darnell Houston, who told me he could prove that Walter was innocent. His voice shook with nerves, but he was determined to meet with me in person. He lived in a rural part of Monroe County on farmland that his family had worked since the time of slavery. When I arrived at his home, he walked out to greet me. He was a young black man in his 20s with a worried demeanor. As soon as we sat down, he got right to business. Mr. Stevenson, he began, I can prove that Walter McMillian is innocent. Really? Bill Hooks is lying. I found out that he testified that he drove by the cleaners on the day that girl was killed, and that's a lie. How do you know? We were working together all that day. We both worked at the Napa Auto Parts store last summer. I remember that Saturday when that girl was killed because ambulances and police started racing up the street. You were working on the Saturday morning that Rhonda Morrison was killed? Yes, sir, with Bill Hooks from about 8 in the morning till we closed after lunch, after all them ambulances went by our shop. It was probably close to 11 when the siren started. Bill was working on a car in the shop with me. There ain't but one way out the store. He never left the entire morning. If he said he drove by the cleaners when that girl was killed, he's lying. One of the most frustrating things about reading Walter's trial record had been that the state's witnesses, Ralph Myers, Bill Hooks, and Joe Hightower, were so obviously not believable. Their testimony was laughably inconsistent and completely lacking in credibility. Myers' account of his role in the crime, Walter kidnapping him to drive him to the crime scene and then dropping him off afterwards, never made any sense. Hooks's response to every line of questioning was to repeat over and over again that he saw Walter McMillian walk out of the store with a bag, get into his lowrider truck, and get driven away by a white man. He could not answer any questions about what else he saw that day or what he was doing in the area. My plan had been to immediately challenge Walter's conviction to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. The state had done so little to prove Walter's guilt that there weren't a lot of legal issues to appeal, but the evidence against him was so unpersuasive that I was hopeful the court might overturn the conviction simply because it was so unreliable. Once the case was on direct appeal, no new evidence would be considered. The timing for filing a motion for a new trial in the trial court, the last chance to introduce new facts before an appeal begins, had already expired. Chestnut and Boynton, Walter's lawyers for the initial trial, had filed a motion before withdrawing, and Judge Key had quickly denied it. Darnell said he'd told Walter's former lawyers what he told me, and they had raised it in the motion for a new trial, but no one took it seriously. In capital cases, a motion for a new trial is rarely granted. But if the defendant claims new evidence that could lead to a different outcome in the case, or that undermines the reliability of the trial, there is typically a hearing. After speaking with Darnell, I thought about refiling his assertions before the case went up on appeal. Maybe, just maybe, we could persuade local officials to retreat from the case against Walter. I made a motion to reconsider the denial of a new trial for Walter. I got an affidavit, which is an official statement, from Darnell stating that Hooks's testimony was a lie. I took the risk of talking to a few local lawyers about whether the new prosecutor might acknowledge that the conviction was unreliable and support a new trial if there was compelling new evidence. I was still sorting out how to proceed when Darnell called me at my office. Mr. Stevenson, you have to help. They arrested me this morning and took me to the jail. I just got out on bond. What? I asked them what I'd done. He sounded terrified. They just came and arrested me and told me I had been indicted for perjury. Perjury? Based on what you told Mr. McMillion's lawyers a year ago? I hung up with Darnell, shocked and furious. Indicting someone for perjury or lying under oath without any investigation or evidence was unheard of. Police and prosecutors had found out that Darnell was talking to us, and they decided to punish him for it. Indicting Darnell was a worrisome signal that the prosecutors were willing to threaten and intimidate people who contradicted them. I called Tom Chapman, Monroe County's new district attorney, to set up a meeting to discuss why authorities had arrested Darnell for speaking up. I'd heard that Chapman, a former criminal defense attorney, would be fairer and more sympathetic to someone wrongly convicted than lifelong prosecutor Ted Pearson. Chapman was in his 40s and had talked about modernizing law enforcement in the region. I was hopeful. On my way to his office, I decided to give him a chance to explain what was going on. This was my first meeting with anyone associated with Walter's prosecution, and I didn't want to begin with an angry accusation. Perhaps the people who had prosecuted Walter were just misguided, even incompetent. I knew some of them were bigoted and abusive, but I guess I held out the hope that they could be reoriented. The Monroe County Courthouse is situated in the heart of downtown Monroeville. I walked through it until I found the DA's office. I announced myself to the secretary, who eyed me suspiciously before directing me into Chapman's office. I'd met prosecutors who dressed like they would rather be out hunting ducks than running a law office, but Chapman was professional and courteous, and approached me with a pleasant demeanor. I was intrigued and looked forward to a candid conversation. As we chatted for a bit, I got down to business. I'm very concerned about this McMillion case. I've read the record, and to be honest, I have serious doubts about his guilt and the reliability of this conviction. Well, this was a big case, there's no doubt about that. You do understand that I didn't have anything to do with the prosecution, don't you? He replied. Yes, I do. I nodded. This was one of the most outrageous crimes in Monroe County history, and your client made a lot of people here extremely angry. People are still angry, Mr. Stevenson. There's not enough bad that can happen to Walter McMillion for some of them. This was a disappointing beginning. He seemed completely convinced of Walter's guilt, but I pressed on. Well, it was an outrageous, tragic crime, so anger is understandable, I said, but it doesn't accomplish anything to convict the wrong person. Whether McMillian has done anything wrong is what the trial should resolve. If the trial is unfair or if witnesses have given false testimony, then we can't really know whether he's guilty or not. Well, you may be the only person right now who thinks the trial was unfair. Like I said, I wasn't involved in the prosecution. I was becoming frustrated, and Chapman probably saw me shift in my seat. I thought about the dozens of black people I'd met who complained bitterly about Walter's prosecution, and I was starting to see Chapman as either naive or willfully indifferent, or worse. I'm not the only person with questions about this case, Mr. Chapman. There's a whole community of people, some of whom claim to have been with Walter McMillion miles away when the crime was committed, who believe in his innocence. There are people for whom he's worked who are absolutely convinced that he did not commit this crime. I've talked to some of those people, Chapman responded, and they can only have uninformed opinions. They don't have facts. Look, I can tell you right now that nobody cares who slept with Karen Kelly. There is evidence that implicates Walter McMillion for this murder, and my job is to defend this conviction. He was becoming more argumentative, and his previously calm voice was rising in anger. Do you intend to prosecute everyone who challenges the evidence? My voice was now rising in exactly the way I wanted to avoid, but I was provoked by his attitude. A jury indictment seems like a tactic designed to intimidate and discourage people from coming forward with evidence that contradicts the state's case. The charge against Mr. Houston seems really inappropriate, Mr. Chapman, and legally indefensible. I knew I was lecturing him, but I wanted him to know that we were going to defend Walter in a serious way. Chapman's voice shifted from argumentative to blandly matter of fact. Don't worry. I may drop the perjury charges against Houston. Now that the judge has denied your motion to reopen the case, I don't have any interest in pursuing charges against Darnell Houston. But I do want people to know that if they make false statements concerning this case, they are going to be held accountable. I was confused and a little stunned. What are you talking about? The motion to reconsider has been denied? Yes, the judge has already denied your motion. You must not have gotten your copy of his order. He's down in Mobile now, so sometimes there are mail issues. I tried to conceal my surprise about the court's ruling on the motion without even permitting a hearing. I asked, so you have no interest in investigating what Darnell Houston is saying about the possibility that the state's main witness may be lying? Ralph Myers is the state's main witness. It was clear that Chapman had looked more deeply into the case than he had initially claimed. Without Hooks's testimony, the conviction wouldn't be valid, I said, leveling my voice. State law requires confirmation of accomplice testimony, which can only come from Hooks. Mr. Houston said that Hooks is lying, which makes his testimony a critical issue that should be heard in court. I knew I was right. I knew that what I was saying wouldn't persuade Chapman, but I felt the need to say it anyway. I left his office extremely frustrated. Reading the record had shown me that there were people who were willing to ignore evidence, logic, and common sense. Their only goal was to convict someone and reassure the community that the crime had been solved and the murderer punished. I'd seen the abuse of power in many cases before, but there was something especially upsetting about it here, where not only a single defendant was being victimized, but an entire community as well. I filed my stack of motions in Darnell's case just to make sure that they knew we would fight them. Darnell was thrilled to hear that the charges against him would be dropped, but he was still shaken by the whole experience. Mr. Stevenson, all I wanted to do is tell the truth. I can't go to jail, and I'll be honest, these folks have scared me. I understand, I said, but what they did is illegal, and I want you to know you have done nothing wrong. They're the ones who have acted very, very inappropriately. They're trying to intimidate you. I reminded him that I was now his lawyer and that he could refer anyone who gave him trouble to me. He looked a little relieved, but was pretty rattled when I left. I got in my car with the sinking realization that if everyone who tried to help us on this case was going to be threatened, it would be very difficult to prove Walter's innocence. Arresting someone for coming forward with credible evidence that challenged the reliability of a capital murder conviction, the more I thought about it, the more disoriented and provoked I became. It was also sobering. They arrested people who said things that were inconvenient. How would they react if I challenged them even harder? All right, let's go ahead and answer that last question. Why is Darnell arrested for perjury? You'll find the answer in this paragraph right here. Police and prosecutors had found out that Darnell was talking to us, and they decided to punish him for it. If you'd like to use a sentence starter, you can use he is arrested. Oop, didn't mean to do caps lock. He is arrested because blank. All right, everybody, that is it for today's read aloud. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, take care.